Today I want to answer your top traditional foods questions that I've received throughout the year. Hi, sweet friends. If you're new here, I'm Mary from marysnest.com and author of the Modern Pioneer Cookbook, and I'd like to welcome you to my kitchen. Throughout the year, I receive a lot of questions. Sometimes they're in comments on my YouTube videos, sometimes they're in comments on my website, and other times I just receive emails and they've got lots of questions in them. So today I wanted to take a little time with you and answer the top questions, the most common questions that I receive throughout the year about traditional foods. A lot of the questions that I receive are about baking. Another area where I receive a lot of questions is about cultured dairy, and specifically making cultured dairy using the L-Reuteri probiotic. And sometimes the questions that I receive are somewhat related to traditional foods, but at the same time are somewhat personal about me and specifically how I run my traditional foods kitchen. So let's start with baking. One of the most common questions I receive has to do with the no-knead sandwich bread that I've shared with you in the past. The most common questions that I receive about that sandwich bread is that, number one, people will ask me, "Oh no, what did I do wrong? My bread didn't rise above the rim of the baking pan." But the good news is, the dough should not rise above the rim of the baking pan. You actually want to catch it before it goes any higher and then bake it, because that is the secret to having success with that bread. That bread is what's known commonly as a batter bread. It's very, very loose. You basically pour it into your baking pan. You let it rise just enough where it comes up to the rim of the pan, but not past the rim of the pan, and then you bake it. And that's what makes it soft and very similar to a sandwich bread that you would buy in the sleeve at your grocery store. So you haven't done anything wrong. You just want it to rise to the rim of your baking pan and go ahead and bake it. And the second question I will often get, which is very related to this, is, "Oh no, my bread was dense and it was indented in the middle. What did I do wrong?" And then when I correspond with the person, I often find out that they let their dough rise above the rim. They let it get a little too high. And what happens with batter breads is, as if you let them rise too much, then they don't have any gumption, so to speak, to create a nice light loaf once you put them into the oven. They're kind of exhausted. And so when you let the bread rise too high in the baking pan, when you put it into the oven, it will often collapse in the middle and create a dense bread. So just let that bread rise up to the rim of the baking pan and get it in the oven, and you're going to make a perfect, literally foolproof loaf of delicious sandwich bread. And I just want to mention that if my talking about this sandwich bread is new to you, I will have a curated playlist in the description underneath this video that'll take you to all of my bread baking videos in one nice curated playlist for you, of which that sandwich bread will be in that playlist. The next area of baking in which I get a lot of questions, and I have a very detailed video where I go through a lot of the questions I get for sourdough baking, and that'll be in that playlist that I mentioned in the description below. But of course, you can watch the videos, you can read the blog posts, but sometimes you just like a short, direct question, and that's kind of what I was hoping to accomplish with this video, because I want to address those common questions that I get a lot. And when it comes to sourdough, one of the most common questions I get, and this often comes from parents of young children, is that The sourdough bread is so sour, my kids don't like it. What should I do? And that's totally understandable because a child's palate is much more sensitive than an adult palate. Our palates are just older and we don't taste foods as strongly or as intensely as children do. And so what you can do is something that James Beard, the famous chef and cookbook author, shared years ago, and I believe he shared this in his book, Beard on Bread. I think that's the name of the book. And what you can do is add in a little baking soda to your flour when you're baking your bread. And mind you, you don't have to try to knead it in after the fact and do all these things that sometimes you'll read recipes talking about. You can go ahead and add it right in with your flour when you're making your sourdough dough. And that should help cut some of the sourness. Now, there's a lot of science behind why sourdough tastes the way it does, and it has to do with the whole fermentation process and how long or short you ferment, in essence, your sourdough dough to then go on and use that dough to make a sourdough bread. A shorter fermentation time may create a less sour sourdough bread, but if you cut the fermentation time, you may also have a slightly denser loaf of bread. Now, other things you can do is when you're feeding your sourdough starter, make sure that it smells nice and yeasty. If it smells more like alcohol or even worse, like nail polish remover, you're going to get a very sourdough bread because you have a very sour sourdough starter. So if your sourdough starter smells very much like alcohol and you want to get it to smell more like yeast, then what you're going to want to do is feed your sourdough starter in a way that's going to encourage the proliferation of yeast as opposed to the proliferation of good bacteria, because it's that good bacteria that does make sourdough starters smell more like alcohol, more like nail polish remover, and just take on a more sour flavor. If you can get your sourdough starter to smelling more like yeast, and I think we know what that smell like when you smell bread and it's yeasty. You want it to smell more like yeast. You're going to want to take your sourdough starter, and as you go through the feeding process to get it where it's bubbly and you're ready to bake with it, you want to put it in the refrigerator. You want to keep its feeding schedule, but you want to keep it in the refrigerator. And the reason is yeast will proliferate a little better when it's cooler as opposed to the good bacteria, which will proliferate a little better when it's warmer. So by putting your sourdough starter into the refrigerator, you're helping to give the yeast a head start. Now, it's not like you're storing it in your refrigerator. You're going to take it out. You're going to remove some of it, what we call the discard, but don't throw that out. You know, if you've been with me a while, you know I have lots of recipes for what to do with that discard that you're removing. But you're going to remove some of it, then you're going to go ahead and feed it with equal parts flour and water, whatever percentages you like, and then you're going to go ahead and put it in your refrigerator. And then you're going to take it out and feed it again. And you might do this twice a day, you know, or like every 12 hours, or you may even want to kick it up a notch, so to speak, and feed it every 8 hours, again, putting it into your refrigerator. After a few days, your sourdough starter is going to smell more yeasty. And then you can bring it out onto your counter, feed it, and get it ready to bake. So these are two ways. The quick and easy way, add a little baking soda. The little longer way, train up your sourdough starter, so to speak, to be more yeasty as opposed to more have higher percentage of good bacteria. You want more yeast as opposed to more good bacteria. Both are good, but both create a different baked good. So that's the second method that I'm sharing with you, is just going to take you a little longer. But it'll be worth it if you want to try to make a sourdough bread that tastes less sour. The quick way, just add a little bit of baking soda, start with a 1/4 teaspoon, and if that still doesn't produce the results that you like, move up to a 1/2 teaspoon. But you really don't need much, because if you've ever added too much baking soda when making a quick bread or muffins, you know it can take on a kind of odd, funny flavor. So be a little careful with how much baking soda you use, but that'll definitely help to tamp down some of the sourness. And I just want to mention, with all of this, when it comes to sourdough baking, or any type of baking for that matter, baking is a learned skill or a learned art. And I get a lot of questions about baking from first-time bakers who may have just made only 1 loaf of bread. And I'm always happy to answer those questions and encourage people on their traditional foods baking journey. But the best experience is, or the best teacher is, the experience of making bread. So just start making bread, and don't worry if it's not perfect the first time or the second time or the third time. You can always turn it into croutons or turn it into breadcrumbs, or do a variety of different things with it. Over time, after those few initial attempts, you're going to get to know your oven. You're going to get to know your flour. You're going to get to know your bread. You're going to get to know what the best temperatures for baking bread in your particular oven are. You're going to learn what days work best often in terms of your schedule for making bread. You're going to learn what days in terms of the weather work best for making bread. All of these things you're going to learn, and you're going to keep track, as I've often recommended, having some sort of kitchen journal where you write all this down so you don't forget. Over time, I'm telling you, within a few months of practicing baking, you're going to be a really good home baker. Whether you make baked goods with packaged yeast from the grocery store, or whether you make baked goods with sourdough, after a few months, you're going to be very good at baking. And so you're not going to have to, and you're going to be, how can I phrase this? You're just going to recognize that you're a home baker, and that every single loaf of bread doesn't need to be perfect like the bakery. We don't have commercial ovens. We don't have commercial equipment. We're doing the best we can as home bakers. So we don't want to compare ourselves to the grocery store or to the professional baker, or even the hobby baker who maybe spends day in and day out baking even in their home kitchen. Most of us are just on our journey of becoming traditional foods cooks and bakers, and we want to just get to the point where we're making a meal, making a bread that our family enjoys, but every single loaf doesn't need to be like the previous loaf or the future loaves, because there is going to be variations in our home kitchens. And so I want to reassure you about that, and know that over time you're going to get better and better and better. And the bottom line is, everybody's just going to be happy that you made homemade bread. Now, don't worry, I'm trying to keep this kind of short and sweet, so to speak, because I do tend to, when it comes to Q&As, make very long videos. And I have videos from previous years where I think they went 2, almost 3 hours long, where I was just answering a lot of questions. And I'll be sure to link to those videos in the description below, because I think that those will be helpful. And there's timestamps, and also you can move around exactly to the questions that you want answered. In this video, I really wanted to just kind of focus on the top questions, the common questions that I get the most throughout the year. But if you have a lot of sourdough questions, don't worry, because I have answered a lot of these in videos, and I also have very detailed sourdough recipes, a sourdough starter recipes, and in those videos I also walk through a lot of questions and answers. So hopefully those will be very helpful, especially if you're new here and you've not seen those videos in the past. And so don't worry, I've answered a lot of questions, so the information is here. I just wanted to focus today on some of the common questions that I've really received throughout this particular year. Another area of questions that I've received surround culturing dairy using L-reuteri. And this was a method that was popularized by Dr. Davis, who has the book Supergut. My sweet husband was terrific to get this off the bookshelf for me, but this is Dr. William Davis. He's a medical doctor. He wrote this book, Supergut. You know, there's so much talk about gut health these days. And you may also know him as the author of the Wheat Belly books. He's got a series of those, both how to heal your gut if you've had trouble with wheat, and also recipes. But this book specifically focused on making, what a lot of people have nicknamed super yogurt. And in Supergut, what Dr. Davis talks about is making this kind of super yogurt. Technically, you can't call it yogurt, at least here in the United States, because the FDA has rules and regulations on what yogurt actually is. Because yogurt, what's called yogurt, needs to be cultured with certain types of good bacteria, certain type of probiotics. And the yogurt, or super yogurt, or super cultured dairy that is discussed in Dr. Davis' book, Supergut, is cultured with a good bacteria known as L-reuteri. And I have videos where I show how to make this cultured dairy, both in a yogurt maker and in the Instant Pot. And I will receive a lot of questions because about how to make this, because in the video I go into a lot, in both of the videos I go into a lot of detail, showing the first and second batch and how they look different and whatnot. And sometimes people have challenges when they're making this. And the reason is the yogurt, or the super cultured dairy, super yogurt, needs to be maintained at 100 degrees Fahrenheit for 36 hours. And that can be challenging because if you go much over 100 degrees, you can start to kill the L-reuteri bacteria, and obviously good bacteria. Obviously you don't want to do that. And the reason the culturing time is so long is, as Dr. Davis explains in his book, is that it significantly increases the amount of the L-reuteri that is in the cultured dairy, as opposed to a small amount if you cultured it in the same way that average yogurt is made. But by culturing it for that full 36 hours, you create a real nutrient-rich, probiotic cultured dairy with this L-reuteri. Now, is it a little challenging, if you don't have a specific yogurt maker or an Instant Pot or a sous vide piece of equipment to make this yogurt? Yes, because the key is maintaining it at that 100 degree Fahrenheit temperature. And that's what I get a lot of questions about. Oh, it went too high and now it doesn't work, different things like this. But what I recommend in these yogurt makers that will maintain a 100 degree Fahrenheit temperature point, are relatively inexpensive and quite common today, which is good news. And many of the Instant Pots, if you have one, you can check it. Many of them are made to be able to maintain a temperature of 100 degrees Fahrenheit. Now, next year I'm going to experiment with a sous vide. I've not done that yet, but I do look forward to trying that. But the bottom line is that if you have one of these pieces of equipment that can maintain the 100 degrees Fahrenheit temperature, you'll be all set to be able to make this type of yogurt or cultured dairy. And we're going to talk about it in a minute because I do get questions, why El Reuteri? But in the videos, I show how my first batch, it looks a little curdled, and then the second batch comes much better. And that has generally been my experience. And the question that I get about the first batch is, well, okay, I'm going to use some of this, I'm going to scoop some of this out to make the second batch, because the first batch you start with the actual good bacteria, the probiotic, the actual tablets that you crush up. And then from there on in, you can just use some of your previous batch to inoculate your second batch. But a lot of people will say, well, what do I do with that first batch? It looks kind of curdled. That's a great question because you don't want to throw anything out. The good news is you can just mix it up, and the curdling and the liquid and whatnot will just mix up. In many ways, if you make kefir or kefir, depending on how you say it, on your counter, and sometimes it'll separate out, and you've noticed that once you remove the grains, if you just whisk it up or mix it with a fork or spoon, whatever the case may be, it all comes back together and you can drink it and enjoy it. The same is true of the El Reuteri cultured dairy. With your first batch, even though it comes a little curdled, possibly, and some people it doesn't. It can be hit or miss. But if it does come a little cultured, just mix it up and eat it and enjoy it. It's going to be fine. So what is the importance of culturing dairy with the El Reuteri probiotic? This is a question that I will get a lot also. Why the El Reuteri? And can I use other good bacteria? And can I mix things up? And so on and so forth. Now next year, I'll give you a little preview. I am going to share with you ways to make cultured dairy in an easy way with different good bacterias, which Dr. Davis does talk about other good bacterias specifically for particular conditions that may be helpful to you as opposed to the El Reuteri. However, that said, the question that I will get is, why the El Reuteri? And the reason is, which Dr. Davis discusses in detail in his book, El Reuteri is a good bacteria that used to be really common in people, in our ancestors. And we, modern man, modern woman, has less and less El Reuteri than our ancestors. And El Reuteri can be linked to having good spirits, having a good disposition, and so on and so forth. And so if we can increase good bacteria in our gut that can help us have a better disposition, also contributes to sleeping better, contributes to better skin. It has many overreaching qualities that may be very beneficial for us that we've lost that our ancestors had. And if you've seen either of my El Reuteri videos, I go into a lot of detail where I talk about this, but that's the bottom line. It's just a good bacteria that served a lot of roles, that our ancestors had a lot more of than what we have. And so it may be beneficial to us to increase the El Reuteri in our digestive tract and try to be more similar to the amounts that our ancestors had. And hopefully, the more we increase good bacteria, a variety of good bacteria in our digestive tract, scientists tell us a healthy digestive tract, you might say gut, a healthy gut, whatever the case may be, one rich in good probiotics makes for an overall healthier person. So that's why the L. reuteri, because it's a very interesting strain that our ancestors had a lot of and we don't have a lot of. So maybe we need to increase that. Now, what I will often get the question, oh, can I mix it with other different strains and so on and so forth? The problem with that is, yes, you can do it, but number one, you need to make sure whatever those other strains are can culture in that approximately 100 degree Fahrenheit range. You don't want to get too warm and then start killing your L. reuteri. But also, you're crowding out the space for your L. reuteri. So why not just make a cultured dairy devoted to your L. reuteri and make other cultured dairies with other strains of good bacteria? And we're going to go into a lot of we're going to go into this in a lot more detail next year, and I look forward to sharing that with you, because a lot of my focus is really on improving gut health, because there's so much research available to us, even as lay people. You have things that are easy to read. You don't need to be a medical doctor. And Dr. Davis is very good at explaining all of this in his book. But the more I read and the more I learn is that good gut health, good bacteria in our digestive tract is so significant to so many areas of our health. It's not only good overall for our bodies, it's good for our brains as well. And so definitely, if you don't have this book, I highly recommend it. I'm going to do more with this book next year. And so if you don't have Super Gut by Dr. Davis, it's very, this is a New York Times bestseller, I believe, and it's very common. You probably see it at all your local bookstores. I'm sure they have copies at your library. Read this, study it, and try making the L. reuteri super yogurt, super dairy, and then look forward to next year when we go into 2025 of making more of it with me in different ways, and really just improving our overall gut health. So I went on a little long there, but I just want to touch base on another question that I get, and I think this is an important one. A lot of people will ask me regarding making the L. reuteri supercultured dairy is, can you use milk alternatives? Because that we are making this with dairy. We're using often, as Dr. Davis will recommend, half and half. He likes to make a very rich cultured dairy. It's exceptionally tasty. But what if you don't want to use some form of dairy? Can you use these alternative milks? And yes, you can. There's just some, what I've written here is, while traditional recipes use dairy, some individuals have experimented with non-dairy alternatives. I have not done this yet, but this is something that I will address next year. However, the results may vary, and achieving the desired consistency and bacterial growth can be a little more challenging, and that's true. You have to take some additional steps to help the L. reuteri really flourish in these alternative milks. And that is something that, as I mentioned, I do get this question periodically, and it's something that I don't have an immediate answer for you, but that's something that I do look forward to exploring next year. Another question that I've been getting, and this is relatively recently, but I've been getting a lot of questions about this because I gather this is something that has been discussed in the news, and that's regarding ferments. And people are concerned that cultures that eat a lot of fermented foods may be developing stomach problems. And these are specifically the fermented foods like the vegetables, like the sauerkraut, the kimchis, and so on and so forth. And so what's going on there? And should we stop eating fermented foods? The answer is no. Fermented foods are very good for us, but fermented foods are best when made homemade. And the reason is fermented foods that are made homemade use very moderate amounts of salt. Sometimes fermented foods that are sold at the grocery store have much higher amounts of salt in them. And this is all relatively new research and it's still being addressed, but sometimes, although the salts that we tend to use in our traditional foods kitchens, like the sea salt, and many of you like the Redmond real salt and so on and so forth, are beneficial to our health. They have a lot of minerals in them. Unfortunately, sometimes the commercially used salts contain various ingredients in them that are not natural and have sometimes been stripped of the various minerals and whatnot that are found in the sea salts and the Redmond real salt type products that we use in our traditional foods kitchens. So there's a lot of variables between homemade fermented foods and store-bought fermented foods. And again, it all comes back to why we want to make as much homemade as possible, why we want to make as many foods homemade as possible. So don't worry about the fermented foods that you're making at home. Just be a little more careful about any fermented foods you might buy at the grocery store. And over time, as I learn more about this, I'll definitely share it with you and answer your questions and provide links where you can read more about these things. But the other aspect to always keep in mind about these fermented foods, whether store-bought or making homemade, is that these are generally used in consumption as condiments. So it's probably best not to sit down and eat a huge bowl of fermented foods. That you may be overdoing, even in a homemade version. It's meant to be a condiment. It's meant to be added to a meal to assist in digestion. That's why fermented foods are so wonderful, because they aid in digestion. They bring good bacteria into our bodies. They prime our digestive tract to be able to receive food and extract as many vitamins and minerals from the food we're eating. Because a healthy digestive tract is supported by fermented foods, and a healthy digestive tract allows us to better absorb the nutrients from our foods. So think of your fermented foods as condiments, just like you wouldn't eat an entire cup of ketchup. You don't want to go overboard with any of your fermented foods. So don't worry as you read these things about fermented foods in the news. Know that the homemade fermented foods are different, and this is so common, when you read a lot of these studies and they say, oh no, don't eat this food, but then often you find out that it's some commercially, prepared product or very large scale raised foods that are maybe not, being pastured and so on and so forth. So just know that your homemade fermented foods are probably very different than your commercially prepared fermented foods. And that continue to make your fermented foods homemade and enjoy them as condiments. The other questions I get a lot are about different types of oils and what oils we should be using in our traditional foods kitchens. And again, sort of under that whole umbrella of fats, I always focus on using good quality animal fats. These are not oils per se, but under that whole umbrella, in our traditional foods kitchen, I like tallow very much. That's beef fat. It's specifically beef fat that's been rendered from suet. Suet is the fat around the kidneys of the animal and of the cow, and it doesn't have that beefy odor. And I also recommend lard. That can be very good for baking. You don't want to use things like the solidified vegetable oils that look like lard. You want to use real lard, and preferably leaf lard. That again is you want to get the leaf fat from around the kidneys of the pig and then render that into leaf lard. I have videos where I show you how to do all of this, to how to make your own tallow, how to make your own lard, and then how to use it. Also to butter. I can't say enough good things about butter. And I show you, if you have access to cream, how to culture the cream, raw cream, even better. And if it's not raw, don't worry. I show you how to culture it and then make cultured butter. That's a wonderful fat to use. And when it comes to oils, I really like primarily in my kitchen to use extra virgin olive oil. And I'm blessed that right down the road here in Texas, we have olive ranches, and I'm able to buy a local olive oil, so I know that it is a good quality olive oil. That's something you want to be very careful of. You've probably read this also too, because I know from you I get a lot of questions about this. You know, olive oil being adulterated with other oils and possibly seed oils, which we'll talk in a minute. And so knowing the source of your olive oil, all the better. And if you really don't know too much about where your olive oil came from, you can put a little dollop in the palm of your hand. You can rub it like this together, warm it up a little bit, and then put it like this to your face. Give it a good whiff. And if it smells like very fresh and green, you'll know. If it smells very pleasant, chances are it's a good quality olive oil that is 100% olive oil. If you go like this and then you smell it and it smells, some people will describe it like turpentine, but if you don't know what turpentine smells like, chances are if you rub your hands together and then you go to smell it, and it just may be bitter, maybe not pleasant, maybe off, maybe rancid. Some people will say like mechanical. It's been described different ways. Chances are it's two things may have gone wrong. Number one, it may just be rancid. Number two, more likely often, it's been adulterated with other oils, cheaper oils. So keep that in mind. Just do the best that you can. Now, moving on to talking about seed oils, these are very processed oils. And there's more and more literature available as to why these seed oils are not good for our health. And you really want to avoid these oils. And you don't want to bring them into your traditional foods kitchen because they are highly processed oils. And we want oils in our kitchen that are not heavily processed. We want oils that are more in their natural state. And a lot of these seed oils were not oils that were eaten by traditional cultures. So there's no track record, so to speak, on whether they're good or not good for our health. And in most cases, a lot of the research you'll read will find that people who eat a lot of or use a lot of seed oils for cooking or eat a lot of foods that contain seed oils have health problems. So focusing on your good fats, your tallow, your lard, your butter, your olive oil are all good fats to keep in your kitchen. Also too, if you like coconut oil, finding a good source for coconut oil can be a good oil to have in your traditional foods kitchen as well. Now, what about avocado oil? It seems so popular. I will confess, I'm not a fan and I don't like it. I don't like it in any preparation. And I've always wondered why. And I've tried to search out really good sources of avocado oil. I've rubbed it between my hands and tried to smell it. I just find it so off-putting. Well, something that's very interesting, and this is research that's kind of started bubbling up in around 2023, and then Better Homes and Gardens published an article about avocado oil, and there's some very interesting things about avocado oil that I want to share with you, because that is a question I often get is, Mary, why don't you like avocado oil? Mary, why don't you make mayonnaise with avocado oil? Mary, why aren't you using avocado oil to do this, that, or the other thing? And all I've really been able to tell you in the past was I just don't like it. I don't like the taste. But now I know more about it, and so I want to answer these questions for you in more detail. First of all, avocado oil was in essence discovered. It's kind of a funny word to use, but avocados obviously have been around a long time. But the process of being able to extract oil from an avocado, I believe, was developed sometime in the 1990s. So avocado oil is not a traditional oil in the sense of something like olive oil or coconut oil. It's a relatively new oil. Now, eating avocados is great, and eating avocados has been around for a long time, but the extraction of the oil is something that's relatively new. So there's not a lot of historical data on consuming consuming avocado oil and its effects on our health. So whenever I'm thinking of things for my traditional foods kitchen, I really like to focus on those foods, those traditional foods that are, so to speak, tried and true, and that have spanned many generations of providing good health to the traditional cultures that consumed that particular food. That said, what I read starting in 2023 was that avocado oil, not unlike a lot of the problems that have happened to olive oil, which I shared earlier, is that somewhere around 70% of avocado oil, and I'll link to some articles about this, have been adulterated. And that's why you may find the taste a little off-putting or the smell a little off-putting. It can be very difficult to track down good sources of avocado oil. And all of this research, I think from around 2023, was put into an article in Better Homes and Gardens, and then I started getting a lot of questions about that. And so that's the main problem. So if you just feel very dedicated to wanting to use avocado oil, even though it's not a traditional oil in the sense of being extracted from the avocado, since it's a more modern extraction. And that doesn't necessarily mean bad, it's just that there's not this massive amount of research associated with it because it's not that traditional, it's relatively new. But if you decide you definitely want to stick with avocado oil no matter what, you're going to want to try to find a reputable source for good, high-quality avocado oil that you know has not been adulterated. And you want to go about this the same way if you use olive oil, that you search out good sources for your olive oil that you know are pure and have not been adulterated. So I just wanted to answer that. That's why, in the past it was I didn't like avocado oil because it probably all of the ones, especially since something like around 70% of them can be adulterated, that maybe that's why I never liked it. Maybe I was never able to find a good source of avocado oil. And then secondly, I don't see it as a traditional oil, so I tend to not bring those type of foods into my traditional foods kitchen. So I'll definitely share more with you about that. I'm going to do a whole video next year all about avocado oil, but I did want to just answer those questions that I received more recently about concerns over avocado oil. So now you know why those articles were starting to pop up, and we'll definitely discuss that more in the coming year. Now, I have a lot of questions, and maybe we'll follow up more with this in the coming year, but as I said, I had 21 pages of questions. But something that I do want to address that is very, I get a lot of questions about this. This is very, so to speak, heavy on your hearts when you're on your journey of creating a traditional foods kitchen, so that you don't become overwhelmed and just throw in the towel and get back on the fast food line. And that is that I get a lot of questions on the time management of running my traditional foods kitchen. And since we are in the winter, when I'm filming this video, I do have a winter menu plan. And if you receive my newsletter, you have probably already downloaded that winter menu plan. If not, if you go to my webpage, and I'll have a link in the description below, you'll see how you can download that winter menu plan. And I highly recommend that, especially no matter where you are in your traditional foods journey. But that menu plan walks you through the whole timeline of how to prepare 3 traditional meals a day, and then I have a week's worth of menus for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. In that, it's a very extensive menu plan. It's not just 1 or 2 pages. It's very extensive. And while you're over there on my website, also download my Essential 4 Corners traditional foods pantry list, because I get a lot of questions. What should I have in my pantry? What do you mean when you use the term 4 Corners pantry? Which quickly, what that means is your working pantry, where you keep your non-perishable foods, then your refrigerator, your freezer, and then your extended pantry, or what we nickname the prepper pantry. So download that pantry list. It's, gosh, I don't know, 30 some odd pages maybe. And I cover everything that you want to consider stocking in your 4 Corners pantry for a traditional foods kitchen. So that and the winter menu plan, and I'm hoping that I'll be able to do more menu plans for a spring, summer, and fall, but we're in the winter right now. You've got that available to you. That combined with the pantry list is really going to help you not only stock your kitchen with the foods, your traditional foods kitchen with the foods you need. The menu plan is going to help you develop a nice rhythm to preparing the foods that I recommend that you stock, and creating nice 3 meals a day, tasty and nutritious 3 meals a day. But just for a quick overview, what I do is, first of all, and I recommend this to anyone beginning their traditional foods journey, don't rush out or rush into trying to make, first of all, don't rush out and try to stock your 4 Corners pantry overnight. That's a journey in itself, little by little by little, and finding the sources that you like. Many of the sources may be local to you and will make the foods more affordable. That's always a good thing. So stocking your pantry is a journey. Then creating your traditional foods kitchen is a journey. Start slowly. And I always recommend the first thing to do is just learn how to roast a chicken. And I've got a couple of videos where I show you how to roast different types. I go over all the different types of chickens that are available that one can buy. And then I have some different recipes for roasting them. But just start with a roast chicken. throw in some potatoes, carrots, onions. You have a traditional foods meal right there. It's easy to make. It's healthy for you. It's going to be less expensive. And as I said, healthier in the sense that it's going to be a lot more nutritious than anything that you can buy at a fast food restaurant. And then you're going to have the bones left over so that you can really start your traditional foods journey and make your first batch of bone broth. So that's really where I say to start. Then once you fall into that rhythm, you will then start maybe soaking your oat groats or your steel cut oats or your old-fashioned rolled oats. You'll start soaking them the night before, and then they cook up very quickly the next day, and there you have breakfast. And then when you learn how to roast that chicken, you now have the leftovers, and so that can serve for lunch, that can serve for dinner, depending on how many leftovers you have, depending on how many mouths you have to feed. But usually my rhythm is very simple. I roast a chicken on Sunday. We enjoy that. I use the bones to make a bone broth, throw in a few chicken feet that I usually have in my freezer. I now have some wonderful homemade chicken bone broth. I use that as a base for soups to either just enjoy, or sometimes just enjoy it as a sipping broth, or use it as a base for a soup, to use some of the leftover chicken to make a chicken soup, or to use some of that bone broth to make a gravy, to kind of reinvent the chicken meal into something that now may have some mashed potatoes and some gravy, something along those lines. And that may get us through Monday, and then maybe Tuesday, if I'm lucky, and I get every little scrap off my chicken. Tuesday may be the soup day. Monday may be the leftovers. Tuesday may be the soup day. And then Wednesday, I'll usually think of some other traditional food that I want to cook. And you'll see this progression that I share with you in that winter menu plan. I may decide to make a meat-based meal with maybe some slow-roasted beef. I just shared with you, believe it was last week, how to make a bone-in pot roast and why it's important to cook meat on the bone. The meat releases nutrients into the meat, whether you're cooking the chicken on the bone, the whole chicken, or you're cooking a roast on the bone. It's very important. And so I may make something like that midweek. And then there'll be some leftovers that can be kind of reinvented and enjoyed on Thursday. And then usually Friday, I like to cook some fish. And I have this rhythm that I stick with throughout the week, not making complicated recipes, making things that I'm familiar with and that are relatively easy. When I want to make something a little more elaborate and I have the time, I'll do that. But I don't rush into it, and I know I always have my usual recipes that I know my family enjoys and that I can basically make with my eyes closed, and it's just falling into that rhythm. And over time, if you get about a month's worth of recipes under your belt, there's not a lot of repetition because, yes, those recipes may be repeated over the season, but then when you go into your next season, I talk a lot about eating seasonally, you're going to have a new batch of recipes, but ones that over time become familiar to you and are easy for you to make. And I really believe when you start with good quality traditional foods, you don't need to do a lot to them to just make a nice meal. Some recipes, when I look at them online, wow, they're so complicated and there's so many ingredients. And I really shy away from that. And I get a kick out of it because some people say, oh, you have a YouTube cooking channel, and oh, you write cookbooks. And yes, I put an S on the end of that. I know you've shared with me you have my first cookbook that you really enjoy, the Modern Pioneer Cookbook, which is very much a manual for creating a Traditional Foods Kitchen. It's so much more than a cookbook. And I've got a second cookbook coming out next year that I know you're really going to love. But I get a kick out of it when people will say to me, "Oh, you have a food, a food website and a food cooking channel and cookbooks and so on and so forth. And oh, you must have so many recipes and whatnot." Yes, to a certain extent, but I keep them very simple because traditional foods are simple foods. Our ancestors, and I don't even have to go that far back, my mother had a certain repertoire of simple yet tasty and nutritious recipes that I was raised on. They were seasonal, so nobody got bored, and they were tasty, and they were nutrient rich and nutrient dense. And we ate that in this rhythm of eating. And I really liked the idea that there was a rhythm to preparing these recipes and eating these foods to always provide good nutrition. There was often the roast chicken on Sunday. I've shared this with you in the past, and then leftover soups, and then liver on Wednesday. That's how my mom would get the organ meats in, and our school also had liver on Wednesday. And then Thursday, maybe some type of meat, fish on Friday. And I love this rhythm because this is a rhythm that our ancestors had, and not only this similarity week after week, but then differences with the seasons. And there's a book called The 3-Season Diet, written by John Douillard. I can't say enough about that book too. And what I like about it is people will say, "Oh, should I do keto? Should I do paleo? Should I do low carb, high carb, this carb?" All the different diets that are out there. And the beauty of eating seasonally is that you will eat foods that your body is meant to eat in a certain season, because talking more about gut bacteria, the good bacteria in our gut changes ever so slightly with the seasons, priming it to digest the nutrients in certain foods that are in season where we live. And I love this idea because, and John Douillard in his book discusses this, how in the early spring, we're eating more salads and baby greens and things like that. In the summer, we're eating more fresh fruit. And then as we go into the fall and winter, he says 3 seasons because the fall is going to be the end of the harvesting and the butchering and whatnot. And so the foods in the fall and the winter are going to be similar. And then we're eating more of like a richer diet, more fats, more animal meats. And he talks about how you kind of go low carb and then maybe high carb and then maybe paleo or carnivore or low carb, whatever the case may be. And it's just such a beautiful rhythm that we're eating like that throughout the seasons, and how our body should hopefully do best eating in that fashion, and that you wind up eating all of the diets. I kind of like that no food is off limit. You're eating all of the diets, just you're eating them in the seasons when you should be eating them. So I know everybody has different opinions on this and different health restrictions and so on and so forth, but I do like that idea of the seasonal eating. So that's basically how I keep a rhythm going in my kitchen. I just have a pocket full of recipes for the winter, for the spring, for the summer, for the fall, and I just rotate through those, and I prepare those things that I can in the evening, like soaking grains, because we'll eat a whole host of different types of grains for breakfast. And then if you eat seasonally, it can be very It can be very difficult. No, it can be very easy. It can be very easy to prepare very simple meals that are seasonal in nature. Like during the spring and summer, you may pull back a little on eating your hot cereals, and you may be inclined to eat something more with fresh dairy that you've then cultured and that you're mixing with fresh fruit. So as you see, these things are not complicated, and you can culture your dairy the night before, you can soak your grains the night before, you can have your bone broth simmering. The nice thing about bone broth, chicken bone broth only takes 6 hours. You don't want to over simmer it. And so and if there's things left, cartilage and whatnot that hasn't dissolved, you can just make another batch. You don't have to become in a situation where you're simmering it for so long that it gets a little out of control. You can roast your chicken, whatever day of the week works well for you, and enjoy it. Then put your bones on a simmer and make your chicken bone broth, and everything is done in that one day. Or if you want to wait, I often like to use 3 carcasses to make chicken bone broth. I'll just pop it in a bag along, one of my scrap bags, along with my scrap vegetables that I've saved, and I'll pop it in my freezer. And then one day when we're having a roast chicken, and maybe that's my 3rd carcass, I'll defrost my other 2, I'll add my 3rd one to it, let it simmer on the stove for the 6 hours, and before I go to bed, my chicken bone broth has been simmered and strained and in my freezer. And so it's just, don't overdo, don't overcomplicate, don't feel you need a lot of fancy recipes. Keep it simple, download that winter menu plan, take a look at that, and definitely, as I said, I had 21 pages here. I get so many questions, and I really try to focus on answering as many as I can online. But I just wanted to come today and address some of the newer questions I've been receiving that are also ones that are more common. And hopefully for those detailed questions that many of you have sent me or left on my videos or on my webpage, hopefully my more detailed Q&As, my more detailed frequently asked question videos will address those. And as I said, I'll have it all in the description below, and it'll be very easy for you to find. So I hope talking about baking, talking about cultured dairy, and talking about creating a rhythm in our kitchens, this will help us as we go into 2025, because we'll be doing more baking in the cooler months. We'll be starting to culture dairy as more dairy, especially those of us who are able to get local dairy, we'll be culturing more dairy and talking more about that. So hopefully this has given you a little bit of a preview of all of that. And hopefully as the new year comes upon us, you can say, okay, if I'm at the beginning of my journey, I'm just going to roast a chicken and we're going to go from there. And if you're farther along on your journey, hopefully my sharing about how I get the bone broth going, how I soak my grains, how I may culture my dairy the night before, the same with ferments. A lot of these things I will prep and get ready after dinner. If you've ever known the Fly Lady and how she has her system for cleaning, I kind of adopted that in a way for my system of cooking. She talks about, the before bedtime routine. And I very much have that in place. We eat, I clean my kitchen, and as I'm cleaning my kitchen, I will be doing my bedtime routine. Fly Lady talks about tidying up here and there. I'm basically soaking my grains, getting my cultured dairy ready, maybe doing a ferment, whatever time of year it is and whatever is appropriate for me to be preparing, I will do that in the kitchen. And I really enjoy, you're going to laugh when I tell you this, but I enjoy various TV programs. And I will either have the iPad set up or like on the iPhone, I'll have it set up, and a lot of times if it's the phone, it's like propped up on the top of one of my coffee makers. And I have a little entertainment, and it kind of helps pass the time while I'm washing up the dishes, whatever the case may be, soaking my grains, making some cultured dairy, maybe slicing some vegetables for a ferment. all of these things help. And find what works for you. Maybe you enjoy music and you just want to put some music on in your kitchen and help pass the time. Maybe you have helpers. My husband and I now, I often had my son as my helper. My husband and I now are empty nesters. And my husband, yes, my husband, I was going to say my husband is a grown man. Yes, my husband is a grown man. But our son is a grown man. And he has his own apartment. But if you have some helping hands, often children enjoy getting involved in these things, and they can help you clean the kitchen and they can help you prep things. My son really enjoyed doing that. And so these are all the ways to develop the rhythm, but just don't make it complicated. Don't start pulling out complicated recipes that involve a lot of ingredients and a lot of time. That is going to stymie your ability to create a traditional foods kitchen. Keep your foods, hopefully some local, some you may have to purchase at the grocery store, but whatever the case may be, keep them as simple and as in their whole form as possible, and don't have recipes that require a lot of preparation of them. Have them be simple meals like a pot roast with a bone-in chuck roast that I made for you last week. Something like that. Even with a pie crust, a simple pie crust. You don't have to get all fancy with it. And I showed you how to make a pie crust using spelt flour a couple of weeks ago. These things, and then you can make it and flatten it out and put it in your freezer, and it's there for the next time you want to make a pie, whether a sweet pie or maybe like a chicken pot pie with some leftovers from your chicken. These are the rhythms that you want to develop. Don't feel you need to go and look for every single recipe out there for how to make a pot roast, every single recipe out there for how to make a pie crust. It's not necessary. Well, my fire died, so I should wrap up here. I've been talking to you for a long time. But yeah, I provide you very simple, tried and true traditional recipes. I don't jazz them up. These are recipes that have been around for ages. But unfortunately, with this advent of so many food blogs, there has been so much tweaking of traditional recipes that they barely resemble the original, so to speak. And it's those original traditional recipes that we want to bring back to our traditional foods kitchen. That's what makes our life easier. Tried and true traditional recipes, whether it's making a bone-in pot roast, whether it's making a traditional meatloaf, whether it's making a traditional bread, whatever. Simple and traditional. This is what's going to make the journey to creating your traditional foods kitchen an easy journey. Well, if you want more recipes and more information on creating your traditional foods kitchen and more questions answered, be sure to click on this video over here where I cover all of that and more. And in the meantime, I want to wish you a very Merry Christmas, a Happy Hanukkah, and a very happy and healthy, blessed New Year. Love and God bless.